Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Adam Shepherd.
And you're listening to the IT Pro podcast. Or are you? While having a skeptical mindset has always been worthwhile, it increasingly seems these days that we can't believe anything we read, hear, or see. And while disinformation is nothing new, indeed the word itself can be traced back in English to the 1940s, the use of technology like deepfakes and micro-targeting has brought it into the lives of almost all of us.
Disinformation can also be a business concern, whether that's to do with cybersecurity or sowing doubt about products, and it's one against which it can be difficult to fight back. Joining us today to talk about the tools and spread of disinformation is Andy Patel, a researcher at F-Secure's Artificial Intelligence Centre of Excellence. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Andy, when we talk about disinformation, how would you define it? And is there some kind of difference between it and normal propaganda, as it were?
I like to think of the difference between misinformation and disinformation is that misinformation is when someone accidentally got something wrong, whereas disinformation is when someone purposefully tells a lie or tells a mistruth.
Mm. And so, is it just another word for propaganda? I don't know, or is there kind of, I guess, something more to it? I guess what I'm asking, what is disinformation? Because I think that it can sometimes be seen as sort of a synonym for propaganda, but quite often we associate that with war, whereas this seems to be far more insidious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I think about propaganda, I could think about more like a state putting out disinformation. Whereas if I think about the kinds of disinformation that I see on the internet, anyone can do it, right? Anyone can tweet out a rumor or a fake story about COVID vaccine or what's going on in the US elections or that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. I guess, there's a bit less of a concrete motive, like you say, sort of propaganda at a state level is typically to turn you against your own state, whereas I think said during the introduction that disinformation, the main objective seems to just be to create doubt about absolutely everything.
Yeah, and it seems that there are these groups of people that do it a lot, and they work together and they do this sort of stuff all the time on social networks.
So, what are the main groups that you see putting out disinformation at this kind of scale?
Well, I mean, I've mostly looked at Twitter, and what you see on Twitter is filter bubbles. So people who, for instance, talk about specific topics, whether it be politics or Bitcoin or something like that, tend to be connected with other people who talk about that same stuff. So when they put out new content, it tends to only be seen by that same group. For instance, the political groups, I suppose, especially on the conservative side of things, have tended to put out this disinformation, for instance, around the US elections or around these conspiracy theories like QAnon and all the related disinformation that goes along with that stuff, like anti-vax, COVID-related disinformation, anti-mask, anti-lockdown, all that kind of stuff. And these groups tend to be formed around these follow-back mechanisms. So accounts will post lists of other accounts to follow, and if you follow that account, there's a good chance that they will follow you back. So you find these accounts on Twitter that are following tens of thousands of other accounts and also being followed by tens of thousands of other accounts. And they form this group where some of them are like influencers, some of them put out original content, original tweets, and others just retweet that stuff. And so every time one of these influencers puts out a tweet, it'll get thousands of retweets, thousands of likes. But I mean, all of that content will only really be seen by that same circle of people who followed each other back. So it's not like they're getting their message out to the world, but they are reinforcing those messages within their groups. And then when you look at the kind of conversation that happens in those groups, you see people getting angry about having to wear masks or angry about election counts in the recent US election, things like that.
Mhm.
So, how does that message spread outside of those bubbles then? How does it become kind of what we'd think of as kind of large scale, kind of damaging misinformation?
So, well, it sort of depends on what content we're talking about. I mean, if we're talking about anti-vax, anti-COVID, that kind of stuff, that is actually being propagated by these groups who are generally into conspiracy theories, right? These groups that end up following QAnon, and those groups tend to be a mesh of people who may have all believed in specific conspiracy theories to start with, but when they were brought together, they start to be introduced to other things. And so, if they may have just been into like natural health medicines or whatever, then they get
Mm,
introduced to anti-vax, and they get introduced to anti-mask, COVID stuff like that, and it kind of goes more and more right wing as you
Mm.
mm,
as you go down those. Whereas if you think about the what's happening in the US and the elections and all the claims about fraud in the voting, that's being spread out by high profile users, verified users, politicians, and things like that.
So what's the objective behind this? And is there a unified objective, I guess? So is there, I don't know, some shadowy puppet master behind it all going, ah, yeah, if we put out this information, then XYZ is going to happen? Or is it literally, just kind of somebody thinking, oh, I don't like this mask because it makes me feel a bit short of breath. Therefore, it must be restricting oxygen supply, and everybody should know this. Or is it, I guess, a bit of a mix?
I think there are various reasons. I think some of it probably comes from like a gamification
Mm,
point of view. I notice these accounts on Twitter that always want new followers. Um, it just seems to be a number that they can make increase, and therefore makes them feel better. And having more followers within the same bubble doesn't make really any difference, especially if you're only retweeting other people.
yeah,
Um, some of it's probably sort of for the lulz, right? The stuff that's organized on the chans or those groups, things get put out, and it's just to see if they can steer the public conversation, which they can in many cases, or for instance, accounts that try and get specific hashtags to trend.
yeah,
Um, some of it is trying to sort of recruit into other causes, trying to recruit people into believing in other conspiracy theories, or to recruit people into sort of more radical or extremist causes.
mm,
And I suppose some of it might just be to, to stir up anger, stir
yeah.
up anger around what's happening in the election, or what's happening because of the lockdown, or, these sorts of things. So there could be, I suppose, many motives for doing these things.
Yeah, and I must say, as I'm going to step in and defend people who are interested in conspiracy theories while not necessarily being necessarily beholden to them. But I do think QAnon is an interesting example based on what you just said and what I've seen and heard and stuff elsewhere. That it seems to have started almost like a LARP, a live action role play on the chans, and then become, it's just taken off and become its own beast, and now people are demonstrating in real life at political rallies or holding their own rallies, and you've got the whole Pizzagate thing that goes in with it, and it's got a bit more out of control, that it seems, than a lot of other of these sort of disinformation things, especially the ones that turn themselves into full conspiracy theories.
Indeed, I mean, I think that a lot of people see QAnon as just this uh, weird conspiracy theory where they think that a bunch of Satanist pedophiles are running the world from behind the scenes. But actually, when you look at what's happening, especially in Europe with QAnon, it's a way of bringing together people around things like anti-lockdown, anti-mask, COVID hoaxes, or and basically right-wing stuff.
Mm,
So when you see gatherings in European countries around QAnon ideas, they might be about save the children or something, but the underlying cause, it actually goes all the way to the far right. And I mean, this comes from talking to people who have actually, at one point or other, believed in QAnon, and
mm,
they can definitely verify that the ethos behind it is actually far right.
yeah.
It's just an easy way to get people into that ethos because it may come from some very lightweight conspiracy theories and things like that.
So, what would you say are the main kind of tools that these groups use on Twitter to spread disinformation beyond the kind of follow lists and whatnot that you've already described?
But I mean, yeah, the follow lists are basically a way of gaming the system, I suppose. But it unintentionally. I mean, these people have this mechanism that they use to amplify what they're doing. But generally speaking, I suppose it's things like memes or just very strong, quotable, short messages, the sort of thing you'll see in tweets. Yeah, memes have always been a good way of spreading this information, right?
Mm.
Well, we all love a meme, don't we? We all love a good meme, and depending on your own humour preferences, you're going to find some funnier than or more applicable, or they call more
Right.
to you than others. Yeah,
And you're also going to find ones that piss you off. You know, you're going to find ones that make you angry.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, I would say that like a lot of the people who participate in this stuff maintain multiple accounts,
mm,
and they use multiple accounts to retweet the same thing, or just to generally post lots of content of or similar type of content, right?
Mm.
yeah.
There are also these throwaway troll accounts that you'll see a lot on Twitter. Like for instance, if you look at the hashtag BBCQT on the day when they have question time, or the what's that show that, in the evening?
Well,
Uh,
you start seeing Emily Maitlis's surname and stuff, or yeah, you start seeing journalists' surnames popping up. So Peston, it's Peston on Sunday. Marr will pop up. Maitlist starts popping up,
right,
and
right,
yeah, I'd say as somebody who'll go, "Oh, what's happened on this program that I should probably be watching but didn't?"
yeah,
And yeah, a good portion of that is just slagging off whoever was on the telly at the time, or
yeah,
you know, in
exactly.
general.
And so you'll find these long threads, and in these threads you'll find these accounts that have single digit followers following,
Mm,
brand new sometimes, although they don't necessarily have to be. And yeah, those accounts will just reply to the threads with stuff that's meant to make people react, that's meant to
mm,
make people angry and reply back, or just basic lies. You know, they reply with lies about whatever was being said, stuff like that. And that's yeah, those throwaway accounts are really quite common, and often you'll see that accounts like that have like several hundred tweets, but you don't see it when you visit the actual profile because they're all under tweets and replies. Every single tweet that account has ever posted was a reply, and
mm.
if you look at them, they were all troll replies. So they know that the account's going to get shut down at some point. So that's why it's like a throwaway account. But it's still made. I mean, a lot of people fall for that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, how many of these kind of accounts are, in your opinion, genuine users, or rather users who are genuinely looking to troll people, and how much of them are uh, state-backed kind of campaign operatives? Because that's one of the things that we hear kind of again and again about these users, is that they're being operated, which is in itself is, I guess, a conspiracy theory all of its own. Um, that these users are part of kind of coordinated disinformation operations being run by various state level governments.
I mean, you can't. honestly, you can't put a number on that because it's impossible to tell. I don't believe that like a lot of them are probably state run, but I do believe that a lot of it's coordinated. So I do believe that it's people on the chans or people on Discord um, creating these accounts and doing this trolling. I mean, there may be troll farms in the UK doing this, but none of it's really very provable unless someone who works for one of those comes forward and talks about it. And we do know that there are plenty of companies around the world that provide these kind of services,
Mm.
and you can pay for a company to set up a bunch of troll accounts and do this and push certain messages. So, uh, I mean, that's obviously very plausible as well.
I guess is it then that's almost like an evolution of things that we've seen before in the realm of cybersecurity, like ransomware as a service, hacking as a service, or whatever. So now you've got sort of trolling and disinformation as a service.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think that when I mean, especially on the run up to some big political event, whether it be an election or a referendum or whatever, you can imagine that people are paying
Hmm.
these services to alter discourse.
Yeah.
So I had one more thing to talk about in terms of tools, which is like this reply spam stuff. So basically, the idea is that accounts post sort of copy paste messages in reply to tweets that were posted by like politicians or journalists and stuff, trying to fish them into believing a certain statement. A
Hmm.
really good example was during last year's UK election when there was this picture of the boy in Leeds Hospital sleeping under the bed on the floor.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
this reporter tried to show the picture to Boris Johnson, and he took the guy's phone away. And
Mm.
after that, there was a reply spam campaign where exactly this kind of copy paste message was sent that my sister works at Leeds Hospital or
Oh
whatever, and
God,
blah blah blah.
yes.
You remember that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's something that when
yeah.
we're talking about like trying to spread disinformation outside of like a bubble or something, that's something that is quite common.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking about the effect disinformation can have on businesses as well as individuals.
See you after the break.
Welcome back. Now, Andy, we've spoken kind of quite generally about disinformation and what it is and how it traps people in. What are the dangers of this for businesses? So, we have got the COVID vaccines that are rolling out at the moment. Have you seen anything kind of targeted towards Pfizer, for example, or AstraZeneca or any of the other producers?
I actually haven't looked for that stuff. I mean, yeah, disinformation around businesses is a thing, although it's not perhaps as um, well known as other types of disinformation. There
Mm.
are even companies that can track like your brand image and stuff,
Mm.
so they could look at what people are writing about your company on social media, on forums, and I mean there are also ways of manipulating these things. So if you're a company that owns a hotel and someone has a grudge against you, then they might buy TripAdvisor, negative TripAdvisor reviews, right? Or you can actually have Google autocomplete changed or gamed. So you can have a company name and the autocomplete would say scam afterwards or something like that.
Yeah.
So when someone's typing in that company name and the first autocomplete suggestion is scam, they're going to think twice about visiting that company's webpage. So there are things that in the realm or of the mechanisms that are used to do other things in the realm of disinformation that that can affect company. Yeah, yeah.
So, how can organizations combat this kind of disinformation?
I think they have to be aware of what's going on, right? So they have to do their own research into what people are saying about their company online. Um, and I guess there are also companies that provide these sorts of services. So I think for the larger companies, they probably outsource that But for smaller companies who couldn't afford that, then they're going to just have to do Google searches and and searches on various platforms and stuff like that. Google autocomplete, it's different based on where you are, and perhaps even whether you're logged into your Google account, and what kind of searches you performed before. So like finding an autocomplete suggestion that's been doctored might not be so easy. So it might be that sometimes this stuff is not visible to the person who's looking for it.
Mm.
But then if it's not visible to the person who's looking for it, is it going to be visible to the kind of wider public? And if it's not, is it really that much of a problem?
Yeah, that is. If you're searching from a incognito browser, it's still probably going to pick up your region and stuff, and so the autocomplete is still probably going to be different. So that autocomplete suggestion change has to be targeted. I don't really know much about how that works because I've obviously never tried it,
Mm.
and the companies that do it aren't. I don't suppose they're all that legit. It's kind of a bit of an SEO type thing, but it is one of those things that you can buy as a service, just like you can buy Twitter followers, retweets, Facebook likes, YouTube
Mm.
views, and all this other stuff.
Yeah. Do you think that this is going to become something a bit like how you kind of smaller businesses have historically maybe thought themselves not as susceptible or as good a target for ransomware and other attacks like that as larger organizations. But increasingly they're aware that you know, if it's easier to squeeze $1 million out of targeting a million companies for $1 each than it is to go after one large organization for 1 million, are they perhaps going to have to become more aware of the fact that they may be targeted by these sorts of disinformation campaigns, or even that their staff may be targeted by such campaigns, so their staff become a risk?
Right, yeah. I mean, I think the thing is when you're talking about these sort of operations, they only scale to the amount of people running the operation. So
Mm.
it's more likely that they'll go after bigger companies because that's where the money is.
Hmm.
And you can't like you can't target a million small organizations and get $1 for them without having people handling getting those payments and doing all that stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is more likely that the larger organizations would be targeted in this case. Again, with the hacking, I mean, the hacking analogy, if a company is very vulnerable and easy to hack into, it's sort of low hanging fruit, and so it's worth doing just because it takes very little of your time, and so therefore you could take that chance as to whether you're going to get that payoff or not.
Yeah.
So, Andy, how do we solve the problem of disinformation? How do we get ourselves out of this quagmire? Or are we in too deep? Is it even possible to combat disinformation at this stage?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I mean, the amount of disinformation that I see makes me a bit pessimistic about the situation. But I mean, the fact is, moderation is like much better moderation is needed. Some of it can be automated, but the fact is that uh, when it comes to understanding what written human language, or what's in a meme picture, or what's in a video. Example, like someone put out a video of, what's it, Nancy Pelosi, where they slowed it down, and by virtue of it being slowed down, it looked like she was drunk. You can't really use a machine learning algorithm to detect that was
Mm,
intentionally made to make her look drunk. You need a person to look at that, right? In the same way that you need a person to be able to understand the context of what's being said in a reply to some other tweet, or that kind of thing,
Mm.
and whether it's sarcasm and this and that and the other. So yeah, although some of it can be moderated by algorithmic means, especially when it comes to looking at quality of accounts that are posting this content, patterns, things like that, trying to associate which accounts belong to the same person. Uh, I mean, the actual content itself needs humans to look at it, and I mean that's something that that the social network platforms tried to do during the US election after the vote count had ended. And they moderated tweets from high profile accounts, right? So they put labels on tweets that were disinformation, or that were not entirely factual, or however they worded those labels, and Facebook did the same. But
Yeah.
there were these tens or hundreds of thousands of accounts spreading these doctored videos, rumors, and whatnot about fraud happening at the vote counting stations, and nothing was done about any of that stuff, and nothing was done about those influence accounts that always get thousands of retweets every time they post something, and those were helping spread all of that stuff, and I believe they probably still are, right? Nothing is being done about that, and partially they have to deal with the actual things that are being posted. They have to identify what sort of things are being posted, and also they need to do something about this machinery that amplifies all of this stuff. Until they do something about that, yeah, the problem is going to continue to exist.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you to F-Secure researcher Andy Patel for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You can find links to everything we've spoken about in the show notes and even more on our website, itpro.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the IT Pro podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you can, leave us a rating and a review.
We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT, but until then, goodbye.
Bye.
The IT Pro podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.